My name is Eleanor, I'm 82 years old, and today I'm going to tell a story I've carried for over 70 years. A story about my mother, Margaret, and the terrible things I witnessed when I was just a 12-year-old child. For decades, this secret has eaten me alive from the inside. It affected my relationships, the way I raised my children, and even today it haunts me in nightmares. But now, in my final years, I feel I need to speak. I need someone to know the truth about what happened in our house in 1953. It was a different time. People didn't talk about certain things, and children were forced to stay quiet, even when they witnessed the unthinkable. But I saw it. I saw everything. And I was never the same again. My doctor says I have maybe 6 months left, cancer, just like my mother had years later. Maybe it's time for the truth to finally come out. Maybe it's time for Tommy's story to be heard, even though he's no longer here to tell it himself. In 1953, we lived in a simple house on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa. My father, Robert, was a merchant who owned the local hardware store and was respected throughout the community. My mother, Margaret, was considered an exemplary woman, beautiful, elegant, always well-dressed at church on Sundays. We were 4 children, me, Eleanor, the oldest, at 12, my brother Charles, 10, my sister Susan, 8, and little Tommy, only 5 years old, with the brightest blue eyes and golden curls that made everyone in town adore him. From the outside, we were the perfect American family. My mother smiled and waved at the neighbors while hanging laundry on the line. My father worked 16-hour days to provide for us. We children were always clean and proper when we left the house, with pressed clothes and combed hair. Our house was always spotless. Mama kept it like a museum, white doilies on every surface, fresh flowers in crystal vases, and the smell of lemon polish in every room. Neighbors would often comment on how lucky we were to have such a devoted mother. But inside that house, behind the perfect facade, there was something rotten, something that only I seemed to notice. Because I was the oldest and most observant, Mama had 2 completely different personalities. One for the world and another for inside the house. And Tommy, poor little Tommy, always seemed scared when he was alone with her. I first started noticing strange things when Tommy was around 4 years old. He had always been such a happy, energetic child, running around the yard, laughing, playing with his toy trucks. But gradually, that light in his eyes began to dim. He started crying more than usual, having terrible nightmares that would wake the whole house. I remember him screaming in the middle of the night, calling for Daddy, never for Mama. He began wetting the bed again, something he hadn't done since he was 2 years old. "Is Tommy sick, Mama?" I would ask when I noticed him picking at his food, barely eating anything. "That boy is just spoiled," she would answer with irritation that seemed too intense for the situation. "He needs more discipline, more structure. I'm going to make sure he learns proper behavior." But it wasn't spoiled behavior. I could see the terror in my little brother's eyes whenever Mama would call his name, the way he would freeze when she said, "Tommy, come here so Mama can give you a bath," or "Tommy, come to Mama's room, I need to help you with something." He would shrink back against the wall, his little hands trembling. Once, I found him hiding in the closet, whispering to his teddy bear, "I don't want to go, Mr. Bear, I don't want Mama to touch me." He was crying so quietly, trying not to make any sound. Charles and Susan were too young to understand what was happening. At 10 and 8, they were wrapped up in their own childhood worlds. But I was 12, old enough to sense that something was terribly wrong in our house. What made everything more confusing was how differently Mama acted in public versus private. When we went to church on Sundays, she would dress Tommy in his little sailor suit and parade him around like a prized possession. "Isn't he just the most beautiful child?" she would coo to the other church ladies, running her fingers through his golden curls. "His Mama's special little boy." The women would smile and agree, talking about how lucky she was to have such a well-behaved, quiet child. If only they knew that his quietness came from fear, not good behavior. Home. Mama's voice would change completely when she spoke to Tommy. It became cold, calculated, almost predatory. She would give him instructions in a tone that made my skin crawl. "Tommy, go to your room and wait for Mama. Don't come out until I call you." I started paying more attention to their interactions. Mama would often separate Tommy from the rest of us, giving him special chores that only he had to do. She would take him upstairs for baths that lasted much longer than necessary. Sometimes I would hear strange sounds coming from the bathroom, muffled crying, quiet whimpers. When I asked Tommy about it, he would just shake his head and look away. Mama says it's our secret, he whispered once. She says bad things happen to little boys who tell secrets. Dad worked constantly to provide for our family. He would leave early in the morning and often didn't return until after dinner. The hardware store was struggling financially, and he was trying to keep it afloat during difficult economic times. When he was home, Mama was a completely different person. She would be cheerful, attentive, cooking his favorite meals and asking about his day. Dad never saw the cold, frightening woman that Tommy and I knew. "Robert, you work so hard," she would say, massaging his shoulders. "Why don't you relax? I'll handle the children tonight." Those were the nights I dreaded most. When Dad would fall asleep early, exhausted from work, Mama would have free reign over the house. Those were the nights when Tommy's quiet whimpering would echo through the hallways. I tried once to tell Dad about my concerns. "Daddy, I think something's wrong with Tommy. He's always scared and sad." Dad looked at me with tired eyes. "Eleanor, your mother takes wonderful care of you children. Tommy is just going through a phase. Some children are more sensitive than others." He trusted Mama completely. In his mind, she was the perfect wife and mother, keeping house while he worked to support the family. He couldn't imagine that the woman who ironed his shirts and packed his lunch every day was capable of such horrible things. It was on a Thursday afternoon, in March 1954, that my world completely shattered. I had come home early from school, with a fever, expecting the house to be empty since Mama usually took Tommy shopping on Thursday afternoons. But as I quietly entered through the back door, I heard sounds coming from upstairs. At first, I thought maybe Mama was cleaning, but then I heard Tommy's voice, not his normal voice, but a whimpering, pleading sound that made my blood run cold. I crept up the stairs, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid someone would hear it. The door to Mama's bedroom was slightly open, and what I saw through that crack changed my life forever. My own mother, the woman who sang hymns at church and baked cookies for school fundraisers, was doing unspeakable things to my 5-year brother. Tommy was crying silently, his little body trembling, while I can't describe the details. Even now, 70 years later, the images are burned into my memory like a brand. "Stop crying," she hissed at him. "This is normal. This is what mamas do with their special little boys. If you tell anyone, they'll take you away from your family forever." Tommy nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face. "I won't tell, Mama. I promise I won't tell." I stood frozen in that hallway for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My legs wouldn't move, my voice wouldn't work. I felt like I was drowning, unable to breathe or think clearly. When I finally managed to move, I ran to the bathroom and vomited until there was nothing left. I sat on the cold tile floor, shaking and crying, trying to understand what I had just witnessed. That night at dinner, I couldn't look at Mama without feeling sick. She sat there calmly, cutting Tommy's meat for him, asking Charles about his baseball practice, acting like the loving mother she pretended to be. Tommy sat rigidly in his chair, picking at his food. I noticed he was sitting strangely, like he was in pain. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he kept glancing nervously at Mama. "Tommy, eat your vegetables," Mama said sweetly. "You need to grow up big and strong." "Yes, Mama," he whispered, forcing himself to take a bite. After dinner, Mama announced that Tommy needed a bath. "Eleanor, you help Susan with her homework. Charles, you practiced your piano." As she led Tommy upstairs, I saw him look back at me with such desperate, frightened eyes. It was like he was silently begging me to help him, but I didn't know how. I tried to concentrate on helping Susan with her arithmetic, but all I could think about was what was happening upstairs. Every sound from the bathroom made me flinch. When I heard Tommy cry out once, I nearly ran up there, but then Mama's voice, sharp and warning, made him go quiet. That night, I lay awake listening to Tommy sobbing quietly in his room across the hall. I wanted to go to him, to comfort him somehow, but I was paralyzed by fear and confusion. What could I possibly say to make this better? Over the following weeks, I became obsessed with protecting Tommy. I started making excuses to keep him away from Mama whenever possible. "Tommy, come help me feed the chickens," I would say when I saw Mama approaching with that look in her eyes. "Tommy, let's go to the creek and look for tadpoles." "Tommy, why don't you play in my room while I do homework?" Sometimes it worked, and I could see the rely. That night, I heard her on the telephone. After everyone had gone to bed, she was whispering, but I crept to the top of the stairs and could make out some words. I can't wait to see you again. Robert suspects nothing. The children don't know. ... Double quotes. I realized that Mama wasn't just the child abuser. She was a woman completely without conscience, capable of deceiving everyone around her to get what she wanted. Looking back now, I realize there were signs that adults should have noticed, but in 1954, people either couldn't or wouldn't see them. Tommy's dramatic personality change, his physical symptoms, his regression in behaviors, these should have raised red flags. Mrs. Henderson, Tommy's Sunday school teacher, mentioned to Mama that Tommy seemed unusually withdrawn and had started having accidents during class. Instead of investigating, Mama simply told her that Tommy was going through a difficult phase and would be better with more discipline. Dr. Mitchell, our family physician, noticed that Tommy had lost weight during his routine checkup. When he asked Mama about it, she explained that Tommy was a picky eater and she was working on getting him to try new foods. Even our neighbors, the Johnsons, commented that they rarely saw Tommy playing outside anymore. That little boy used to be such a live wire, Mrs. Johnson said to Mama over the fence. Now he's quiet as a mouse. Mama always had a ready explanation. He's becoming more mature, less wild. I'm teaching him to be a proper young gentleman. Everyone accepted these explanations because Mama was so respected in the community. She was the woman who organized church bake sales, who brought casseroles to sick neighbors, who always had a kind word for everyone she met. No one could imagine that this pillar of the community was destroying her own child. I tried once to talk to my teacher, Miss Patterson, about my worries for Tommy. He's been having nightmares and acting scared all the time, I told her. Miss Patterson smiled kindly. Eleanor, it's wonderful that you care so much about your little brother, but sometimes children go through difficult periods. I'm sure your mother knows what's best for him. Even when I hinted that something might be wrong at home, adults dismissed my concerns as childhood imagination or sibling worry. By the time I turned 13, I couldn't bear to watch Tommy's suffering anymore. He had become a ghost of his former self, pale, skeletal, jumping at every sound. The abuse was escalating, and I knew that if something didn't change soon, we might lose him entirely. One night in October, after hearing Tommy cry for hours after another bath with Mama, I made a desperate decision. I woke him up quietly around 2 a.m. Tommy, I whispered, we're going to Grandma's house. We're going to tell her everything and she help us. Tommy's eyes went wide with terror. No, Eleanor, Mama said if I tell anyone, they'll take me away. Forever, she said. I'll never see you or Charles or Susan again. She's lying to you, Tommy. Grandma loves us. She'll protect us. I helped him get dressed, and we climbed out of his bedroom window onto the porch roof, then down the old oak tree. Grandma lived about 2 miles away, on the other side of town. We walked through empty streets under the streetlights, Tommy's small hand gripping mine tightly. Grandma Rose was shocked to see us at her door at dawn, both of us dirty and exhausted. What in the world are you children doing here? Your parents must be worried sick. I took a deep breath and told her everything. About the abuse, about Mama's threats, about how Tommy was wasting away from fear and trauma. I told her about the affair too, about seeing Mama with Mr. Peterson. Grandma listened with growing horror, occasionally looking at Tommy, who had curled up in a ball on her sofa, sucking his thumb, something he hadn't done since he was 3. My dear God, Grandma whispered, tears streaming down her face. That poor baby, I'm calling your father right now. But when she called, Mama answered the phone. Within minutes, our parents were at Grandma's door. Mama was crying hysterically, claiming we had run away because I was jealous of the attention Tommy received and was filling his head with terrible lies. Mama was a masterful manipulator. She had prepared for this possibility and had her story ready. She told Dad, Grandma, and anyone who would listen that I was a troubled teenager, jealous of my younger siblings and acting out for attention. Eleanor has always been dramatic, she sobbed convincingly. She's been telling these horrible stories because she's angry that Tommy needs more care than the other children. You know how sensitive he is. She painted a picture of me as a disturbed older sister who was traumatizing my innocent little brother with inappropriate ideas that I had supposedly learned from reading inappropriate books or overhearing adult conversations. Tommy, terrified and completely under Mama's psychological control, couldn't speak up to defend me. When Dad gently asked him if anyone had ever hurt him, Tommy shook his head frantically and hid behind Mama. "You see," Mama said, stroking Tommy's hair, "he's terrified because Eleanor has been telling him these awful stories. She's convinced him that his own mother would hurt him." Dad looked at me with such disappointment that it broke my heart. "Eleanor, I'm shocked that you would put such ideas in your brother's head. Your mother loves all of you children equally. Grandma tried to advocate for us. Robert, maybe you should have Tommy examined by a doctor, just to be sure. But Mama quickly shut that down. I won't have my son subjected to embarrassing examinations because of his sister's wild imagination. What kind of trauma would that cause him?" We went home that day with Mama appearing to be the long-suffering mother of troubled children. The abuse not only continued but intensified, as Mama punished Tommy for the trouble he had caused by not explaining properly to the adults. After our failed escape attempt, Mama became more careful but also more vicious. She made sure there were no obvious physical marks that could be seen by others, but she found psychological ways to torment Tommy that were even more devastating. She began using isolation as punishment, locking Tommy in the basement for hours at a time, with no light. She would tell him that the monsters in the dark would get him if he made any noise. So he learned to suffer in complete silence. She also began denying him food regularly. "Bad little boys don't deserve dinner," she would say, sending him to bed hungry while the rest of us ate. When Dad asked where Tommy was, she would claim he was feeling sick or already ate earlier. The sexual abuse continued and intensified. I could hear Tommy's muffled cries through the walls, but now he never even whimpered during the day. Mama had successfully broken his spirit completely. I tried desperately to get food to him when I could, sneak in crackers or fruit to his room, but Mama had started watching me constantly, suspicious that I might try to cause trouble again. "Eleanor," she warned me one day when Dad was at work, "if you ever try to fill Tommy's head with lies again, I'll make sure he pays for it. Everything that happens to him from now on will be your fault." The guilt was crushing. I felt responsible for making things worse for Tommy. My attempt to save him had backfired, and now he was suffering even more because of my failure. By Christmas of 1954, Tommy was barely recognizable as the child he had once been. He was skeletal and had developed a nervous tic where he would repeatedly touch his throat. He rarely spoke above a whisper and would flinch violently if anyone moved too quickly near him. Charles and Susan were starting to notice that something was seriously wrong with their little brother, but Mama had explanations for everything. "Tommy has been having some health problems," she would tell them. "He needs extra rest and quiet time." I was having my own psychological breakdown from the stress of knowing what was happening and being powerless to stop it. My grades were falling. I had stopped participating in school activities, and I was having panic attacks whenever I heard Tommy cry out in the night. On Christmas morning, when Tommy barely reacted to his presence, just sitting quietly with tears streaming down his face, I knew we were running out of time. He was disappearing before our eyes, and no one except me seemed to truly see it. That afternoon, while Mama was in the kitchen preparing Christmas dinner, I found Tommy sitting in his closet, holding his teddy bear and whispering the same words over and over. "I want to die. I want to die. I want to die." I knelt down beside him. "Tommy, please don't say that. I'm going to find a way to help you, I promise." He looked at me with eyes that held no hope. "Nobody believes you, Eleanor. Nobody's coming to save me. I'm going to be stuck forever." At that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I decided that if I couldn't save Tommy by telling the truth, maybe I could save him by taking him away permanently. I spent the week after Christmas planning our second escape attempt. This time, I was more strategic. I saved money from my small allowance, hid extra clothes in my school locker, and made contact with Mama's sister, Aunt Dorothy, who lived in Chicago. I had written Aunt Dorothy a carefully worded letter, saying that Tommy and I wanted to come visit her and asking if that would be possible. She wrote back enthusiastically, saying she would love to have us for a weekend and that she would pay for our train tickets. I knew that once we got to Chicago, I could tell Aunt Dorothy the truth. She was different from the adults in our small town, more worldly, more likely to believe that terrible things could happen in respectable families. But Mama discovered my plan. Before I could execute it, she found Aunt Dorothy's letter hidden in my school books and confronted me the day before we were supposed to leave. "So you thought you could steal my son away from me?" she hissed, her face twisted with rage. You thought you could destroy this family with your lies. That night, I heard sounds from Tommy's room that were different from the usual. There was more violence, more desperation in Mama's voice. She was punishing him for my plan, even though he had known nothing about it. The next morning, Tommy could barely walk. He moved like an old man, careful and pained. When I tried to approach him, he shook his head frantically and whispered, "Don't, Eleanor. Please don't try to help me anymore. It just makes everything worse." I realized then that my attempts to save him were actually making his situation more dangerous. Mama was using my love for Tommy as a weapon against both of us. What finally changed everything wasn't my efforts to expose Mama's abuse, it was Dad discovering her affair in the most devastating way possible. In February 1955, Dad came home early from the store with severe stomach pains that turned out to be appendicitis. Instead of finding Mama home caring for us children, as she claimed to be doing, he found the house empty except for Tommy, who was locked in his room, and a note saying Mama had gone to the store. Dad was in too much pain to think clearly at first, but when Mama didn't return for over 3 hours, he became suspicious. When she finally came home, her hair was disheveled, her lipstick was gone, and she smelled like men's cologne. "Where were you, Margaret?" Dad asked. "I was in agony, and you were nowhere to be found." Mama quickly made up a story about the store being crowded, and then helping Mrs. Patterson with her sick mother. But Dad was no longer the trusting man he had been. Over the next few weeks, Dad started paying more attention to Mama's comings and goings. He noticed the long shopping trips, the mysterious phone calls that ended when he entered the room, the new clothes that appeared in her wardrobe. Finally, one afternoon, he followed her. He watched her meet Mr. Peterson at the Riverside Hotel, saw them kiss passionately before going inside together. Dad was devastated, but more than that, he was furious. That evening, he confronted Mama with what he had seen. The fight between Mama and Dad was the most terrifying thing I had ever witnessed. Until that point, Dad was shouting, something I had never heard him do before. Mama was crying and pleading, swearing it was a mistake, promising it would never happen again. "How long, Margaret?" Dad demanded. "How long have you been making a fool of me?" "It was just a few times, Robert. I was lonely. You were always working. Don't you dare blame me for your betrayal." I gathered Charles, Susan, and Tommy in my room, trying to shield them from the worst of it, but we could hear everything through the thin walls. Tommy was shaking uncontrollably. The shouting seemed to terrify him even more than usual, and I realized that he probably associated raised voices with being hurt. That's when it hit me. With Dad finally seeing Mama's true nature, maybe he would be more open to hearing about the other horrible things she had been doing. After the house had been quiet for an hour, I crept downstairs. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. Mama was nowhere to be seen. "Daddy," I said quietly. He looked up with red, swollen eyes. "Eleanor, I'm sorry you children had to hear that. Daddy, there's something else about Mama that you need to know. Something about Tommy." For the first time in my life, Dad really listened to me. I told Dad everything, every horrible detail I had witnessed, every sign I had noticed, every failed attempt to get help. I told him about Tommy's deterioration, about the fear that ruled our house, about the way Mama had manipulated everyone who tried to help. Dad listened in growing horror. As I talked, he began to really look at Tommy, to see the skeletal frame, the haunted eyes, the way our little brother flinched from any physical contact. "Tommy," Dad said gently, kneeling down to his level. "Son, has anyone ever touched you in ways that made you uncomfortable?" Tommy's response was immediate and devastating. He began to shake violently, then threw up right there on the kitchen floor. Through his sobs, he nodded his head yes. She said, "If I told, you would stop loving me," Tommy whispered. "She said I was dirty and bad and no one would want me anymore." Dad gathered Tommy in his arms, and for the first time in months, my little brother didn't flinch from adult's touch. He clung to Dad like a drowning person grabbing a life preserver. "I love you, son," Dad whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You are not dirty or bad. You are my precious boy, and I'm going to protect you from now on." Dad called Dr. Mitchell. That very night, despite the late hour, the examination confirmed what we all already knew. Tommy had been severely and repeatedly abused. Dad wanted to press charges immediately, but in 1955, the justice system was not equipped to handle cases like ours. The sheriff, Jim Bradley, was a family friend who had known Mama since childhood. "Robert, I understand you're upset about the affair," Sheriff Bradley said. "But these other accusations, they're very serious. Are you sure the boy isn't just confused? Sometimes children make up stories when their parents are fighting." Even with medical evidence, the authorities were reluctant to believe that a respected woman like Mama could be capable of such acts. The attitude was that these things should be handled privately to avoid destroying the family's reputation. Mr. Peterson, Mama's affair partner, had influence in the town through his business connections. There were whispers that charging Mama would implicate him as well, and certain people in town had reasons to want the whole scandal buried. "Think about your other children," Sheriff Bradley advised Dad. "Do you really want them to grow up with this hanging over their heads? Sometimes it's better to just ... move forward." The message was clear. If Dad pushed for criminal charges, he would be fighting the entire power structure of our small town, and he would likely lose. Instead of justice, we got exile. Dad gave Mama an ultimatum: leave town immediately, and never contact our family again, or he would take his chances with the authorities. Regardless of the consequences, Mama chose to leave. She packed her bags, took some money from their shared account, and disappeared with Mr. Peterson. They left Cedar Falls together, heading to California where no one knew their story. Before she left, Mama tried one last manipulation. She came to each of us children individually to say goodbye, attempting to plant seeds of doubt about the accusations against her. "To me," she said, "Eleanor, someday you'll understand that families have secrets. What you think you saw. Sometimes children misinterpret innocent things. I hope you don't carry this guilt forever." To Tommy, her words were even more poisonous. "Goodbye, my special little boy. Remember, this is all happening because you couldn't keep our secret. Your family is broken now because of what you told." Even as she was leaving, she was trying to make Tommy feel responsible for the destruction of our family. Dad heard that last comment and flew into a rage. "Get out," he shouted. "Get out now before I forget I'm a gentleman." That was the last time any of us saw Mama. She walked out of our house and out of our lives, leaving behind 4 traumatized children and a man whose world had been completely shattered. The months after Mama left were both a relief and a new kind of trauma. On one hand, Tommy was finally safe from abuse. On the other hand, we were all dealing with the psychological aftermath of years of manipulation and violence. Dad struggled to run his business while caring for 4 children, especially Tommy, who required constant attention. Tommy couldn't be left alone, even for a few minutes, without having panic attacks. He refused to eat most foods, had nightmares every night, and would hide under his bed whenever he heard unexpected noises. Charles and Susan, who were still young, had a hard time understanding why Mama had left. Dad tried to explain in age-appropriate terms, saying that Mama had made some bad choices and needed to go away for a while. "But when is Mama coming home?" Susan would ask tearfully. "She's not coming home, sweetheart," Dad would answer gently, "but we're going to take care of each other." I became a surrogate mother to my siblings, helping with cooking, cleaning, and especially with Tommy's care. At 13, I was trying to help heal trauma that I barely understood myself. We all started seeing Dr. Matthews, a psychiatrist from the county seat who came to Cedar Falls once a week. It was unusual for that time period. Most families didn't believe in head doctors, but Dad was desperate to help us heal. Tommy's recovery was slow and painful to watch. For months, he barely spoke above a whisper. He had developed an eating disorder, refusing most foods because Mama had used food as a weapon, sometimes forcing him to eat things as punishment or withholding meals entirely. He also had severe problems with physical contact. Even innocent touches would send him into panic attacks. Dad couldn't hug him. I couldn't comfort him when he cried. And he couldn't participate in normal childhood activities that involved any physical contact. Dr. Matthews explained to us that Tommy's mind had created these responses to protect him, but that they would take time and patience to overcome. "He needs to learn that not all adults will hurt him," Dr. Matthews told Dad. But his trust was broken by the person who should have protected him most. Rebuilding that trust will take years, not months. Tommy started having flashbacks during the day, moments where he would suddenly believe he was back in those terrible situations with Mama. He would curl up in a ball and cry, calling out for help from people who weren't there. School became impossible for him. He couldn't concentrate, couldn't be around other children. and would have meltdowns if any adult tried to correct his behavior. Dad eventually decided to homeschool him, at least temporarily. The worst part was watching Tommy blame himself for everything. "If I had been a good boy, Mama wouldn't have left," he would say. "If I hadn't told Daddy, our family would still be together." No matter how many times we assured him that none of it was his fault. The guilt Mama had planted in his mind was like a poison that was hard to remove. The trauma didn't just affect Tommy, it changed all of us in profound ways. Charles, who was 10, began having behavioral problems at school. He got into fights, became defiant with teachers, and started acting out in ways that were completely unlike his previous personality. "I hate Mama for leaving us," he told me one day, his face red with anger. "But I also miss her. Does that make me bad?" Susan, at 8, developed her own set of problems. She became clingy and fearful, unable to sleep alone, and constantly worried that Dad would leave us too. She would follow him around the house, afraid to let him out of her sight. As for me, I carried the heavy burden of being the one who knew everything. I felt responsible for not stopping the abuse sooner, for not being a better protector to Tommy. I also struggled with my own trust issues. If my own mother could be a monster, how could I ever trust anyone again? I started having my own nightmares, not about what happened to me, but about what I had witnessed happening to Tommy. I would wake up screaming, reliving those moments when I saw Mama hurting him and felt powerless to stop it. Dad was doing his best, but he was dealing with his own trauma too. He had been completely deceived by the woman he loved, had unknowingly allowed his son to be tortured for years, and now had to somehow rebuild our shattered family while running a business and dealing with the town's gossip. Word spread quickly through Cedar Falls about Mama's departure, though most people only knew about the affair, not about the abuse. The official story was that Margaret Patterson had run off with another man, abandoning her family. Some people were sympathetic to Dad, bringing casseroles and offering to help with us children, but others whispered behind our backs, speculating about what might have driven Mama to such drastic action. Robert must not have been much of a husband if his wife felt the need to look elsewhere. I heard Mrs. Coleman say to her friend at the grocery store, "Those poor children," another neighbor commented. "Growing up without a mother's influence, that oldest girl is going to have to grow up fast." But there were also people who suspected that something more serious had happened. Mrs. Henderson, Tommy's former Sunday school teacher, came to visit Dad privately one afternoon. "Robert," she said carefully, "I've been thinking about some of the things I noticed about Tommy before Margaret left. The way he was so withdrawn, so fearful. I'm wondering if there might have been more going on than just marital problems." Dad confirmed her suspicions without going into details. "Tommy was hurt, Mrs. Henderson. We're getting him help now." Mrs. Henderson nodded gravely. "That poor baby. I should have seen it, should have done something." "We all should have," Dad replied. "But we're focused on helping him heal now." The stigma of what had happened followed us everywhere. Some people treated us with extra kindness, as if we were fragile things that might break. Others seemed uncomfortable around us, as if trauma might be contagious. But slowly, very slowly, our family began to heal. It took nearly a year before Tommy could sleep through the night without nightmares. It took even longer before he could accept physical affection without flinching. Dad was incredibly patient with all of us, but especially with Tommy. He would sit by Tommy's bed every night, reading stories or just talking quietly until Tommy fell asleep. He never pushed for hugs or kisses, but let Tommy come to him when he was ready. The first time Tommy voluntarily hugged Dad was almost 2 years after Mama left. Dad cried that night, tears of relief and joy that his son was finally beginning to trust again. I started taking on more responsibility around the house. Not because Dad asked me to, but because I needed to feel useful, needed to feel like I was protecting my family in ways I hadn't been able to before. Charles and Susan gradually adjusted to our new normal. They learned to be extra gentle with Tommy, to give him space when he needed it, and to understand that some days were harder than others. We developed new family traditions to replace the painful memories. Instead of the elaborate Christmas mornings Mama used to orchestrate, we had quiet celebrations focused on being together. Instead of formal Sunday dinners, we had picnics in the backyard where Tommy felt safer. Dr. Matthews helped us understand that healing wasn't linear, that there would be good days and bad days, progress and setbacks. He taught us coping strategies and helped us learn to communicate about our feelings in healthy ways. 3 years after Mama left, we received an unexpected letter. It was postmarked from Los Angeles and addressed to Dad in Mama's handwriting. Dad debated whether to open it at all, but finally decided he needed to know what she had to say. The letter was short and manipulative, typical of Mama's style. Dear Robert, I hope this letter finds you and the children well. I've been thinking about you all and wondering how you're managing. I know I made mistakes, but I hope you understand that I was struggling with problems you couldn't see. I've been getting help out here, and I'm a different person now. One miss the children terribly and would love to have the chance to make amends. Perhaps when enough time has passed, we could discuss the possibility of visits, or even my coming home. The children need their mother, and I've learned so much about being a better person. Love always, Margaret. Dad read the letter to us that evening, wanting our input on how to respond. The reactions were immediate and strong. No, Tommy said, louder than he had spoken in months. She can't come back. She can't. Charles was equally adamant. She left us, Dad. She made her choice. Susan, who had been too young to fully understand what had happened, was confused. But don't we want Mama to come home? I helped Dad explain to Susan why Mama's return wasn't possible, and Dad wrote a firm response, making it clear that Margaret was not welcome in our lives and that any further contact would be considered harassment. That we never heard from her again. As the years passed, we slowly built a new life. Dad never remarried, dedicating himself entirely to raising us and helping us heal from our trauma. He sold the hardware store when Tommy was 10 and took a job as a traveling salesman, which allowed him more flexibility to be home when we needed him. Tommy made remarkable progress, though he never fully recovered from what had been done to him. He learned to trust again, to laugh again, even to form friendships with other children, but he always carried the scars, always had certain triggers that would take him back to those dark days. When Tommy was 12, he started showing artistic talent. Dad encouraged this, buying him art supplies and enrolling him in classes. Art became Tommy's way of expressing feelings he couldn't put into words. His drawings were often dark and troubled, but Dr. Matthews said this was a healthy way for him to process his trauma. Doc Charles grew into a protective, fierce young man who appointed himself as Tommy's guardian. He never talked much about the trauma, but he showed his love through actions, making sure Tommy was included in activities, standing up to anyone who tried to tease him, being the strong big brother that Tommy needed. Susan became the heart of our family, the one who could make everyone laugh when times were tough. She had an intuitive understanding of what each of us needed and often served as peacemaker when tensions ran high. As for me, I threw myself into my studies and into taking care of my family. I was determined to go to college, to make something of myself, to prove that Mama's evil hadn't destroyed our family's potential for good. When I turned 16, I started dating a boy named David Miller. He was kind, patient, and came from a stable family, everything that represented safety to me. But I struggled with intimacy and trust, always waiting for him to reveal some hidden darkness. Eleanor, you act like you're waiting for me to hurt you, David said, one day after I had pulled away from what should have been an innocent kiss. What are you so afraid of? I couldn't tell him the truth. How could I explain that I had learned early that the people who are supposed to love you most can be the ones who hurt you worst? How could I make him understand that physical touch sometimes triggered memories of what I had witnessed in my own home? Dr. Matthews helped me work through these issues, teaching me that not all men were dangerous, that healthy relationships were possible even after trauma, but it was a long process, and I lost several potential relationships because I was too scared to let anyone get close. Tommy's teenage years were even more challenging. The other kids at school sensed that he was different, that he carried some kind of damage, and some of them were cruel about it. He was often called names, excluded from activities, and made to feel like an outsider. Why can't I just be normal? Tommy asked me one day, tears streaming down his face after a particularly bad day at school. You are normal, I told him firmly. You survived something terrible, and that makes you strong, not broken. But I knew that Tommy would always struggle with feeling different, with feeling marked by what had happened to him. I left for college when I was 18, going to the state university about 200 miles away. It was the first time I had been away from my family since Mama left, and I felt guilty for leaving them, especially Tommy. You need to live your own life, Eleanor, Dad told me. You've done more than enough for this family. It's time to think about your future. College was liberating but also terrifying. I was surrounded by young people who seemed carefree and innocent, who talked about their families with casual affection. I envied their normalcy but also felt protective of my own story, keeping it locked away like a shameful secret. I studied psychology, driven by a need to understand what had happened to my family and how trauma affects people. My professors were impressed by my insights and encouraged me to pursue graduate studies. During my sophomore year, I met James, a quiet, thoughtful young man who was studying to be a teacher. Unlike my previous boyfriends, James seemed to sense that I carried some kind of pain, and instead of being put off by it, he was drawn to help and protect me. When I finally told James about my childhood, about Mama and Tommy and everything our family had endured, he listened without judgment and held me while I cried. "That explains so much about you," he said gently. "Your strength, your fierce protectiveness of people you love, your determination to help others. You turned something horrible into something beautiful." James and I married right after graduation, and he immediately welcomed my family as his own. He was especially patient with Tommy, never pushing for closeness but always making it clear that he was there if Tommy needed him. Tommy's transition to adulthood was rocky. He had difficulty holding jobs because of his anxiety and trust issues. He struggled with depression and began drinking heavily in his early 20s. "I feel like I'm broken inside," he told me during one of his darkest periods. "Like there's a part of me that will never work right because of what she did." Tommy went through several failed relationships, unable to maintain intimacy or trust with romantic partners. He would get close to someone, then sabotage the relationship when things became too serious, too real. When Tommy was 25, he had what Dr. Matthews called a complete breakdown. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and began talking about not wanting to live anymore. Dad and I had him hospitalized for his own safety. It was during this hospitalization that Tommy finally began to do the deep therapeutic work he needed to heal. He spent 6 months in an intensive treatment program, learning to process his trauma in healthy ways. "I'm tired of letting her win," he told me when he came out of treatment. "I'm tired of letting what she did control my whole life." Tommy's recovery wasn't immediate or complete, but he began to build a life for himself. He found work as a night janitor at the local school, a job that allowed him to work alone and avoid the social interactions that still caused him anxiety. He also continued his art, eventually having a small showing at the local library. His pieces were raw and emotional, dealing with themes of childhood, trust, and healing. Several people in town bought his work, not knowing the story behind it but responding to the power of his expression. James and I had our first child, a daughter we named Hope, when I was 28, holding her in my arms for the first time. I was overwhelmed by the fierce protective love I felt, and also by the terrifying realization that I would have to trust myself to raise her safely. "What if I'm like her?" I confessed to James in a moment of panic. "What if there's something in me that could hurt our baby?" James looked at me with such love and confidence. "Eleanor, you have spent your entire life protecting the people you love. You could never hurt Hope because you know, better than most people, how precious and vulnerable children are." Still, I was hypervigilant as a mother. I researched every babysitter thoroughly, never left Hope alone with anyone I didn't trust completely, and watched constantly for any signs that someone might be inappropriate with her. When Hope was 5, we had our son, Michael. Having children of my own helped me understand even more deeply how sick Mama had been. Looking at my innocent, trusting children, I couldn't comprehend how anyone could hurt something so precious. I made sure my children knew about appropriate boundaries, about the difference between good touch and bad touch, about their right to say no if anyone made them uncomfortable. I was determined that they would never be vulnerable the way Tommy had been. Tommy was wonderful with my children. He was gentle and patient, always careful about physical boundaries, but clearly devoted to them. Hope and Michael adored their uncle. Tommy, not knowing the pain he carried but responding to his genuine kindness. As my children grew older, they began asking questions about their grandmother on my side. All they knew was that she had died when I was young, which was the story we had agreed to tell. "Why don't we have any pictures of Grandma Margaret?" Hope asked when she was 10. "Sometimes, when people die tragically, it's too painful to keep reminders around," I explained. Hating the lie but not ready to burden my children with the truth, the secret weighed on all of us. Charles had married and had children of his own, and he struggled with the same issues about what to tell his kids. Susan had become a teacher and was especially vigilant about signs of abuse in her students. But she also carried guilt about not speaking up about our family story when she encountered suspicious situations. Dad, now in his 70s, worried about what would happen to our family's story after he was gone. Someone should know the truth, he told me. Not for revenge or justice, it's too late for that. But so that Tommy's suffering means something. So that maybe it could help someone else. Tommy himself was conflicted about sharing his story. I don't want to be defined by what happened to me, he said. But I also don't want other kids to go through what I did. We were all trapped by the shame and secrecy that had surrounded Mama's crimes. Even though we were the victims, we felt like we were the ones carrying the burden of shame. As an adult, with my own children, I often reflected on the signs that had been missed in our household. I became an advocate for child protection awareness, volunteering with organizations that educated parents and teachers about recognizing abuse. Children rarely lie about abuse. I would tell groups of parents and teachers, when a child's behavior changes dramatically, when they show signs of trauma or fear, adults need to take it seriously and investigate. I talked about the importance of believing children when they try to tell you something is wrong, about creating safe environments where children feel they can speak up without fear of punishment or disbelief. I also spoke about the way abusers often target the most vulnerable children and use manipulation and shame to keep their victims silent. My brother was told repeatedly that he was bad and that terrible things would happen if he told anyone. Abusers are experts at making children feel responsible for their own victimization. Through my work with these organizations, I met other survivors of childhood abuse. Their stories were different from Tommy's, but shared common themes of secrecy, shame, and the long-term effects of trauma. One woman told me, "I thought I was the only one carrying this kind of secret. Hearing your story helps me realize that healing is possible, that families can survive these terrible things." I began to understand that our silence, while protective in some ways, also contributed to the isolation that abuse survivors feel. When Tommy was 45, he was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease. The diagnosis was devastating. He was still relatively young, and the disease would progressively rob him of his independence and eventually his life. "I don't have as much time as I thought I would," Tommy told me after receiving the diagnosis. "I've been thinking about Mama, about what happened, about whether we should tell the real story." Tommy's illness became a catalyst for our family to finally confront the decision we had been avoiding for decades. Did we owe it to other potential victims to speak out? Did we owe it to Tommy's memory to make sure his story was told? "I don't want to be remembered only as a victim," Tommy said. "But I also don't want what happened to me to be completely lost. Maybe if people knew, it could help someone else." Dad was supportive of whatever Tommy decided. "It's your story too. Tell, son. Whatever you choose, we'll stand behind you." Charles and Susan were more hesitant. They worried about the impact on their own children, about reopening old wounds, about facing the judgment of people who knew our family. But ultimately, we decided that the potential to help others outweighed our need for privacy. We began working with a local journalist to tell Tommy's story, focusing on the signs that were missed and the importance of believing children who report abuse. The article about our family was published in the state newspaper and later picked up by national media. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of letters from other survivors, from parents who said the story made them more aware of warning signs, from professionals who worked with abused children. "Your brother's courage in speaking out helped me realize that I wasn't alone," wrote one letter. "I've been carrying my own secret for 40 years, and reading his story gave me the strength to finally seek help." Another letter came from a teacher. "After reading about the signs your family missed, I was able to recognize similar signs in one of my students. That child is now safe because your brother found the courage to share his story." But there was also backlash. Some people in our hometown felt that we had aired dirty laundry unnecessarily, that some secrets should stay buried. A few people even suggested that we were making up the story for attention. Tommy was hurt by the negative responses but found strength in the positive ones. "Even if I help one child, it was worth it," he said. As Tommy's Parkinson's progressed, he required increasing care. "I moved him into my home so my family and I could look after him, despite his physical limitations." These were actually some of the happiest years of Tommy's life. He was surrounded by love. My children adored him. James treated him like a beloved brother, and he felt truly safe for the first time since childhood. He continued painting until his hands became too unsteady, creating some of his most beautiful and peaceful work during this period. I feel like I finally understand what family is supposed to be like, Tommy told me one day. I know it's too late for me to have my own children, my own normal life, but being part of your family has shown me what love really looks like. Tommy also began speaking to groups about child abuse prevention, sharing his story when he was able. He was particularly effective talking to law enforcement and social workers, helping them understand the long-term impacts of childhood trauma. Adults need to understand that childhood abuse doesn't just hurt children in the moment. He would tell his audiences, it affects every relationship, every decision, every day for the rest of their lives. But with support and love, survivors can still build meaningful lives. In 2010, when Tommy was 58 and I was 66, we received an unexpected phone call that would shake our family once again. It was from a woman named Jennifer, calling from Los Angeles. I'm looking for the family of Margaret Patterson, she said. I believe she might have been my mother. My blood ran cold. Jennifer explained that she had been raised by her father, Mr. Peterson, after her mother died of cancer in 1995. She had grown up knowing only that her mother had left a family back east but never knowing the details. My father told me on his deathbed that there were children she had left behind, and that she had carried guilt about it her entire life. He gave me this address and said I should contact you if I ever wanted to know about her. Jennifer was 40 years old, which meant she had been born a few years after Mama left us. She had grown up as an only child, never knowing she had half-siblings. Didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to hang up immediately, to protect Tommy from any reminder of Mama, but another part of me was curious about this half-sister we never knew existed. After much discussion as a family, we decided to meet Jennifer. She flew to Iowa, nervous and uncertain about what she would find. Jennifer looked remarkably like Mama, the same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same elegant features, but her personality was completely different. She was warm, open, and genuinely kind. I need you to know, I told her carefully, that your mother left our family under very difficult circumstances. She hurt people we love, and we haven't had contact with her since 1955. Jennifer nodded. My father told me something terrible had happened, that she had made mistakes that she couldn't fix. He said she spent her whole life trying to atone for something, but he never told me what. I looked at Tommy, letting him decide how much to share. To my surprise, he chose to tell Jennifer the complete truth about why Mama had been forced to leave our family. Jennifer was horrified. My God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. She never hurt me. Never showed any signs of. I can't believe she was capable of that. People can be very different with different children, Tommy said gently. Maybe having you gave her a chance to be the mother she should have been all along. Jennifer told us about Mama's life in California. According to Jennifer, Mama had been haunted by guilt about the family she left behind. She had become deeply religious, volunteering at churches and charities, apparently trying to make amends for her past. She used to cry sometimes when she thought no one was looking, Jennifer said. She would stare at this old photograph of 4 children, and when I asked about it, she would just say they were babies she couldn't protect. It was surreal to learn that Mama had kept a photograph of us, that she had thought about us over the years. I felt a complex mix of emotions, anger that she had the luxury of guilt while Tommy suffered the consequences of her actions, but also a strange sadness for the tormented woman she apparently became. Did she ever try to get help? I asked. Did she ever acknowledge what she had done? Jennifer nodded. In her last years, she talked to our pastor about terrible things she had done as a young mother. She never gave details, but she said she had hurt innocent children, and that it was the greatest regret of her life. She told the pastor that she knew she could never make amends because the damage was too great, but that she prayed every day for the children she had wronged. Tommy was quiet for a long time after hearing this. Finally, he said, I'm glad she felt guilty. I'm glad she suffered for what she did. But her guilt doesn't undo the damage. Despite the complicated circumstances of our connection, Jennifer became part of our extended family. She was genuinely remorseful about Mama's actions and wanted to do whatever she could to support Tommy. Jennifer had become a pediatric nurse, specializing in working with traumatized children. When she learned about Tommy's story, she understood that her career choice might have been influenced by stories Mama had told her about children who needed protection. Maybe this is my way of making amends for what she did, Jennifer said. I can't undo the past, but I can try to help other children who have been hurt. Charles and Susan welcomed Jennifer cautiously but warmly. My own children were fascinated to discover they had an aunt they never knew existed. Tommy's relationship with Jennifer was complex. He appreciated her kindness and her work with children, but he struggled with the fact that she represented the life Mama had built after destroying ours. She got to be a good mother to Jennifer, he said to me privately. She got to start over and be normal. Why couldn't she have been that way with us? It was a question that had no satisfactory answer. In 2015, when Tommy was 63, his Parkinson's had progressed to the point where he needed full-time care. He was still mentally sharp, but his body was failing him rapidly. One day, he called me to his bedside with a serious expression. "Eleanor, I want to do something while I still can. I want to write a letter to children who might be going through what I went through." With my help, Tommy wrote a powerful letter that we shared with child protection organizations across the country. In it, he wrote, "To any child who is being hurt by someone who is supposed to love you, it is not your fault. You are not bad or dirty or deserving of punishment. The adult who is hurting you is sick, and they are wrong. I know it's scary to tell someone, but there are good adults in the world who will believe you and protect you. Keep trying until you find one. Don't give up on yourself the way I almost did. You can survive this. You can have a life filled with love and joy, and people who truly care about you. Don't let the person who is hurting you steal your future." The letter was distributed to schools, hospitals, and counseling centers. We received hundreds of responses from children and adult survivors who said Tommy's words had given them hope and courage. Tommy died peacefully in 2018, surrounded by family who loved him. He was 66 years old. Despite everything he had endured, he had managed to build a life that had meaning and purpose. At his funeral, people spoke about his gentleness, his artistic talent, and his courage in speaking out about child abuse. Jennifer gave a moving eulogy about how meeting Tommy had changed her understanding of trauma and healing. "Tommy taught me that survival isn't just about living through terrible things," she said. "It's about finding ways to turn that survival into something that helps others." Dr. Matthews, now in his 80s, spoke about Tommy's remarkable journey, from a severely traumatized child to a man who found ways to help others heal from similar wounds. Tommy's life proves that even the most devastating childhood trauma doesn't have to define a person's entire existence, he said. With support, love, and tremendous personal courage, it's possible to transform pain into purpose. I'm 82 years old now, and my own time is limited. The cancer is spreading, and I know I have maybe 6 months left. That's why I'm finally telling this complete story, with all its painful details and complicated truths. I'm telling it because Tommy's voice has been silenced, but his message shouldn't be lost. I'm telling it because there are still children being hurt by people who are supposed to protect them. And maybe this story can help someone recognize the signs or find the courage to speak up. I'm telling it because our family's 70-year journey from trauma to healing shows that recovery is possible, even from the most devastating abuse. It's not easy, it's not quick, and the scars never completely disappear, but love, patience, and professional help can work miracles. I'm also telling it because I want people to understand that child abusers often look like perfectly normal, even admirable people. My mother was respected in our community, considered an exemplary woman. Evil doesn't always announce itself, obviously. Most importantly, I'm telling it because I want other survivors to know they're not alone. The shame belongs to the abuser, not the victim. Speaking the truth, even decades later, can be liberating and can help others. Tommy spent his life believing that his suffering could serve a purpose, if it helped protect other children. I hope this story honors that belief, and that his courage continues to make a difference even after he's gone. My grandchildren now know the truth about their family history. They understand why I'm so protective, why I've taught them so carefully about boundaries and safety. They also understand that they come from a family that survived terrible things and chose love over hatred, healing over revenge. Our family was broken by evil, but we rebuilt ourselves with love. That's the legacy I want to leave behind, not the story of what was done to us, but the story of how we survived it together. Eleanor Patterson Miller, 82 years old, December 2023.